Before we jump into John's podcast, if you've ever felt like you should be reading more or thinking more deeply about the world, but didn't know where to start or who to do it with, we just launched something for you. It's an online book club and community with Dr. John Patrick. Starting this February, we'll go through important books together, guided by Dr. John, with live discussions and a thoughtful group of people who want to grow in wisdom, clarity, and critical thinking. It's free to join right now, but we may introduce paid access later. A benefit, if you do join now, you'll get exclusive early access to a live Q&A with Dr. Patrick. So if that sounds like something that you want to be a part of, don't wait. Just click the link in the description or show notes to join, and we'll see you inside.
Hello, everyone. What I want to talk about today is a little difficult at one level. Certainly, it's a topic I think we need to talk about a lot more than we have been doing and are doing in our culture. And it often evokes emotional responses before people even think about what's at stake. What I'm talking about, of course, is the relationships between cultures, religions, faith, and the way the narrative that those who currently hold positions of power around the world are manipulating in a way that is very bad for them and for all of us. This goes back to a reading of a couple of weeks back where I think I mentioned on the podcast, although I can't remember for certain, that I'd been very struck by Isaiah 11, where Isaiah, writing about the coming Messiah, says that one of his characteristics will be the way he looks at the fear of God. He actually uses the word delight. He delights in the fear of God. He will delight in the fear of God. That's an amazing statement, isn't it? That for our world, we don't react well to that. But of course, fear is a very important part of nature. All animals live with fear up front. They're always ready to run. We have been blessed by our Maker that we are capable, under his guidance, to create societies that are not fearful. But we're not doing a good job. And we're making it worse by not being willing to talk about it in any proper way. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's why the Messiah delights in it, because he delights in wisdom. We always want to get the end product without looking at its necessary foundations. And appropriate fear is a very necessary foundation for everybody's life. That's why the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And of course, we don't even value wisdom anymore. You ask this Christmas any university students you meet, just ask them this question. Tell me, did you ever leave a lecture and say to yourself, I'm wiser than I was before I heard that lecture? I doubt very much whether you will find many, if any, who say, oh yes. They might stop for a minute and say, maybe, but I didn't really think it through at all. Wisdom is a disappearing word because, of course, it can't be measured. And we have become obsessed without realizing it. If it can't be measured, it isn't real. That is a terrible way to go. You can't measure your love for your spouse or their love for you. Does that mean it has no real existence? Of course not. All the things that matter most cannot actually be measured. This year's been a wonderful one for us, for marriages and new babies, as we now have 8 great-grandchildren. I'm counting one that's not due till the end of next month, I think. But what one feels towards those children, it cannot be measured. The joy that they bring is real and cannot be measured. I think it was Chesterton who was in Orthodoxy who first drew my attention to how much we had to learn from watching how children behave and what gives them pleasure. they are wonderfully open-hearted. Watching small children relate to those around them in an environment in which they have absolutely nothing to fear. So they're uninhibited in that sense. And they stop us in our tracks quite often if we're willing to pay attention. I mean, they clearly look around sometimes at the behavior of adults and say, what's going on with these people? They are innocent of the fears that we increasingly have. And unfortunately, as they grow up, unless we very dramatically change the way we are running our lives, and there's some hope we may do that, they're not going to have that sense of total security which they have as babies for very long. I mean, girls at university, a third of them have serious anxiety problems. Well, if the environment produces that, you're not going to get anything very good out of it. It's not the place to be, in my view, and we need to change it anyway. But of course, the problem is that performance is all that matters now, and you see it everywhere. It doesn't matter as long as you win, so to speak. You saw it in recent cricket test match where appalling failure to put moral choices first, but no, it's all about winning and nothing else. That's true in sports generally. It's not a step forward. It's a step backwards. We don't applaud honourable behaviour, and we don't criticise dishonourable behaviour. That's not good. We need to change it. Go back a little while. I mean, now we're coming out of the far end of the worst aspects of Black Lives Matter, which brings up the other thing about racism. Don't allow anyone to point at racism before asking, do you really mean racism or do you mean cultural differences, which is not race? The black actors who are saying, I want a colourblind environment, they're absolutely right. It should not be acceptable to put things down to race when you can't show that they are. What they're due to is culture. And in every culture, you have the whole spectrum from people who are honoured and loved by everyone around them to those everybody knows are distinctly unsavoury characters. And it varies from time and place. You look, cultures come, cultures go, especially since cultures that organize themselves well become empires, and empires, man succumbs to his love of power. But it's culture that matters, not race. Don't agree to talk about racism. I mean, real racism does exist. There are people who are utterly bigoted, and it's not just white on black, it's black on white as well. It just depends where you are. Yes, we're tribal, and we need to recognize that. And some of our ways of recognizing the tribe are not very good. I mean, Black Lives Matter built around a man who was actually, as post-mortem data showed, over the top. He had amounts of drugs on board that would have killed a normal mortal before he did. But it suited political powers to pretend that it was a racist act, so that the chief of police refused to acknowledge that I forget the name of the man who's in prison now, when he said he was using standard procedure, he was. She denied it in public. That ought to cost her job, but it hasn't. And of course, the founders of Black Lives Matter behaved dishonorably with the money. We're in trouble. What's happening in Minnesota at the moment is beyond belief. The biggest tax scandals in American history. Wow, what on earth is happening? And of course, It's because of the ignorance of our leaders that they refuse to recognize what other people do, they refuse to recognize what cultures are like. I was watching the Saudi foreign minister gently chiding a European interviewer when she said, well, what do you do about jihadism? What would you say to Europe? And he said, I'll answer this in English so you get it quite clear. In Saudi Arabia, if an imam starts preaching violence, we will get him removed. Why don't you do the same? It would help a lot. I mean, it was straightforward. I mean, I've cut it down to the bare bones. You can find it on YouTube. They are changing because, the Saudi government is, the princes are extraordinarily rich, but they are by no means stupid. And they are looking to the future, and they realize they have problems. There isn't enough work for their young people. They have very high levels of unemployment. That's not good, because then you get kids that are useless. We've known this in the West in some ways for a long while. I saw it first as a student when several times, once quite intimately, I was working with a Saudi student who had clearly got there because of connections, was not the brightest man on earth, but utterly prejudiced at that time. Now, it looks to me as though Saudi is saying, look, we've got to, they're realists. So they are looking at what they have been brought up to follow. After all, ISIS and all the rest came from a subset of Saudi society. They were the most violent, but now they're being suppressed within Saudi because Saudi can see the future. They don't run away from it. They know that young people are very disaffected with Islam. Iran being in a much worse state than Saudi, but Saudi is astonishingly, to me, loosening the grips at an incredible rate. They want to westernize because if they're going to use their money well, they've got to create a society where people want to come and work. And so they're setting about it very steadily. I could not believe it when the leader of Saudi Arabia gave his permission for parties in the desert that the old-type Muslim leadership would totally disavow. But he wants to modernize, and he's setting about it. How far he will get, I don't know, because culture matters, and culture takes time. Think about that for a while. One of the things you could ask yourself to think about more is, what is the essence of the financial system of the Western world, and where did its structural, intellectual prerequisites come from? Now, there's billions of dollars of debt out there at the moment because we are abusing the system, except, as you hopefully all know, most of that money is owed to ourselves in one way or another, in bonds, which, of course, could disappear. But if they did disappear, the country wouldn't be livable anyway. I mean, we'd be into subsistence again. But the banking system took a long while to evolve. But without it, we couldn't have developed. I mean, it was some years ago. I was very anti-banking from, student naivety for many years. And then it was Neil Ferguson, in his two books, one, Civilization, and the other, The Ascent of Money. It ought to be in Ascent of Money, but it may be in Civilization. He points out what was necessary for development in the Western world was banking. Africa is stuck. Billions of dollars is poured in, but it all ends up in the coffers of the wealthy because an ordinary subsistence African has nothing to offer as security. So he cannot get a loan because it's not possible. What they need more than anything else, in my view, is, first of all, some lawyers and others like them to give them some sort of land registry. And then instead of allowing the elite to pick off all the best land, which is what they're doing, parcel it out a little bit more honestly. The local arrangement is all sort of ad hoc, but known from person to person. And in many parts, fertile land is very limited, and the chief has control of who uses which land. Nobody owns it, they say proudly. Of course, in practice, the chief can do what he likes. But that's not a good way to go. Property, we look down on it, but I know from having moved to a farm 20 years ago that there is something special when you talk to people. They love their land. And you see what's happening in Britain at the moment with the vicious behaviour of Starmer pretending that a death tax is fair when all he's really wanting to do is to make the farmers bankrupt so that the land can be nationalised and then he can go ahead with his globalist ideas. Terrible. That's where we're at. Culture matters. That behaviour ought to have been stopped already, but we've lost, even in the West, where we had a tradition going back 2,000 years. But it took, 1,700 years of that 2,000 to get to a point where banking might really happen, perhaps a little earlier than that, but not much. You see, the essence of banking is trust. And the Jews, as far as I know, are the only culture which has in its history early on regulations about how trust should work in monetary terms. And nobody else did it the same way. They're told you should not charge your brother when they need money. You should help them. But to other people, you can lend out money, but there has to be a term. So there was the Year of Jubilee, which it's doubtful whether it was ever enacted, but it was a time when all debts should be cancelled and you get a clean slate again. But they were told you come to an agreement and you may charge non-brothers whatever they agree to, but not a penny more. You must keep your promises. The keeping of financial promises is at the heart of banking. And now we're trying to regulate it from outside, and the people doing the regulating turn out very often to have benefited from what they did. No, this was regulation at a different level. It was cultural. The Jews ran the banking system in the Western world for 1,000 years because nobody else had the same levels of trust. They're losing it too now, sadly. I mentioned several times, and hopefully some of you will eventually get round to reading Robert Fogel, but the conversation I had with him in 2000 stopped me in my tracks in terms of hearing a Jew from the world's most famous department of economics, himself a Nobel Prize winner, say to me in a private conversation, well, I fear that there will not be enough trust for America to continue over the next century. Whether we have trusting relationships will be the most important thing. What drove him to write The Fourth Great Awakening was realizing he no longer trusted his students around 2000 in the way that he used to. But he knew they were going off to very good jobs in the government and in banking. But their loyalty to one another would be more important than their honesty. He didn't trust them. The Russians had a very sharp taste of this when the walls came down and Western capitalism was allowed again to a degree. So Western banks went into Russia. Russians also started their banks. The difference was the people naive enough or patriotic enough to go to the Russian banks didn't realize their money going over the counter in exchange for a bit of paper didn't mean anything if the people running the bank ran away and hid somewhere else with the money. the fact that by and large that doesn't happen in the Western world is why banking could work in the way that it did. I mean, at one stage, in a rural culture 50 years ago, I mean, being a bank manager was the easiest job in the world. As long as you gave loans at a rate higher than it cost you to get the money, you could set your income, so to speak, and play golf in the afternoons. The system was controlled. You, in a local environment, you knew who was trustworthy and who wasn't. Now we live in amorphous societies where we don't even know our neighbors in many places. We don't know our neighbors well because only the ones that we've worked with in the setting of either the house or the farm and immediate neighbors. But in the country, it takes a long while for you to be accepted as anything other than a city person, so to speak. So rebuilding trust has got to be critical. Families are important in this environment. We have seen that ourselves in people coming to visit with us and being amazed at the levels of trust that are normative for us. We grew up that way. We've been blessed to stay that way throughout our lives, and the majority of our children at the moment are in the same state. And so our family of 50 at the moment. There's only a few who don't follow the faith, but they're not critical of it in any nasty way. They're simply being honest. Their time will come, I hope. But the culture really does matter. Now, as I've said many times on this podcast, I grew up in a working class area of Birmingham where people had stopped going to church at the beginning of the 20th century. But the culture was preserved by school until 1960, because for up to the age of 15 minimum, when they went to school, working class kids had to listen to a passage from the Bible every day. Most of them never got the habit of reading. Working class people in Britain don't read very much. Now, of course, nobody reads very much around the world. One serious book a year is the adult rate in America at the moment, I'm told. I find that hard to believe, but I have to accept it. Certainly the emails I get frequently thanking me for changing reading habits, it's deeply moving for me, but it's also sad that it's necessary. Tom Sowell talks a lot about this. Read his book, The Intellectuals, if you've got the strength for it. It is this thick, but it's well worth it. But he points out that he uses, for instance, the fact that all the best pianos in the world were made by Jews. That was what they did. The Muslims made carpets like no one else. That was what they did. Both of those activities, of course, can happen in very small groups initially, is what they did. And there is something very important about culture in that sense. I came across another wonderful example of it that I didn't know, and I doubt most Canadians know. But the most effective tank commander in the Second World War was a farmer from Quebec. And he kept his crew together for the whole war because he'd grown up farming 400 acres. He could read land. He knew where you could see and where you couldn't. All those kinds of things were second nature to him. And he had working with him in his crew a guy who worked in the forest and could swing an axe for 10 hours a day. The guy who was moving the shells around, it was no problem to him. He'd been heaving bales through the air and catching them on farms. They were all of that background. They'd either worked on farming machinery or they'd been forestry or whatever. And he came into the war and he actually broke the rules, but he got away with it. He said, I'm not going to lead you into certain death. The Sherman was not a powerful tank, but it was mobile. And Normandy was hedgerow rich and undulating farmland. He could read it like a book. So he went looking for stone walls and hedgerowed areas where the big uh, German tanks like the Tiger couldn't even come. He worked out where they were going to go because they'd be forced to it by the terrain. He looked ahead and set up ambushes. He never confronted them head on. And they did have a shell that could pierce the armor of the Tiger. A shell actually invented by a Canadian young man, and the military here wouldn't believe that could be done, so he had to do it himself. He never got adequately rewarded for it. Neither did this guy who turned out at the end of the war to be the most effective tank commander in terms of kills and survival. And I can't remember his name at the moment, but you'd find him because there's quite a lot at the moment on YouTube of World War II people who made a real contribution because of their background and their particular traits. But that farming background and the ability to realize where he could be and find a wall, poke a hole in it so he was not visible and neither were any of his guys, and wait till the tanks they wanted to kill were within 500 yards without knowing they were there. And boom, they were gone. That kind of phenomenon you still see. I mean, there's a lot of fuss going on in agricultural areas at the moment. John Deere is exploiting farmers by trying to make it illegal for them to service their machinery. Smaller farmers have always looked after their own machinery. They learn how they work from boyhood. They can improvise with bits of wire and stuff when things break down during harvesting. They're not going to wait 3 days for at best for the replacement. They have to get it working now, and they do it. That's where they're at. So agricultural environments create certain sorts of character, and the willingness to help one another is a given because you know you're going to need help too at some point. That creates community. Where I grew up, the community existed, in my view, because although working class people didn't read, they'd all heard the Bible. It's the only book they remembered from school. So they had the moral base that the Ten Commandments provides. Now, of course, the liberal elite in America and around the world say, oh, that's terribly awful stuff, and they want to get rid of it. What they're getting rid of is the foundation. Fortunately, ordinary people can see the difference, and they're beginning to push back. Whether there'll be time to win, I don't know. But ask your university student friends and school kids whether they can tell you the Ten Commandments. I guarantee that it's highly unlikely that you'll get anyone who could do them all. You'll be lucky if you find that could say any of them. And even well-committed Christians can't tell you the verse that introduces both in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, the verse before the first thou shalt not is worth pondering for a long while. I'll leave you to find that and work it out for yourself. So what I'm trying to work my way around very inadequately is the whole question of how we can replace the current ethos with one that talks about culture and has things like honor, moral commitments, moral structure, and how that is going to work out. I found myself, when a little exhausted, picking up Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings again. And of course, that book has got that subtext, whether you like it or not. And a lot of people not only don't like it, they don't even see it. Peter Craif's lovely question is, again, conversation at Christmas if you want something a little different from the usual gossip. Almost everybody of our age, my age, and sort of people, so a whole range listen to me, but Tolkien is still widely read. and asking what their favourite verse is. Say verse, that's treating like the Bible. No, their favourite passage is immensely illuminating. Peter Crave's one is he loves the moment when Sam and Frodo are wandering through Mordor, trying to get to the place where they could dump the ring off into the furnace at Mount Doom. And it's pretty grim. And Sam looks up one night and there's a break in the clouds and a star shines through. And Sam is comforted by thinking it takes him straight back to the Shire. That star is shining over the Shire again. He can look back on all that reliable background. Yeah, hobbits are no better than anyone else, but they had a good culture, a Judeo-Christian culture, really, of course. And Sam himself is based on a Worcestershire gardener, which Worcestershire began at the bottom of the road, where in Birmingham was right on the border between Warwickshire and Worcestershire. And Worcestershire was one of the most idyllic rural counties, fruit and vegetables and the Cotswold Hills, and the Malvern Hills, a lovely part of the country. And Sam is based on a gardener from that part of the world, who lived in an ethos where they didn't know where it came from, but they lived it. That takes time. The promise, if you keep the Ten Commandments, if you live your life in the fear of the Lord, which is why in Isaiah, the Messiah delights in the fear of the Lord, because he realizes the fear of the Lord, he knows, is the beginning of wisdom, and wisdom is in very short supply.